You're listening to Inside iOS Dev, show about real-world iOS development. Today with you, your hosts, Alex Bush.
And Andrew Rohn.
And today, we're gonna talk, I'm gonna interview Andrew. He's done a big refactoring at work at Reddit, and
Yeah.
I want to hear all about it.
Okay, yeah, let's do it.
So yeah, Andrew, tell us, what was the problem in the first place? Why did you want it to refactor? Your code is perfect, right?
Let me see here. Yeah, definitely not. So Reddit is, so I'll give some context really quick. It'll, I think, make more sense. So Reddit is growing as a team and a company. The iOS team in particular is growing. And so people are stepping on each other's toes more in the code base.
How many people you have now? How many you used to have, and where
I
you
think
are now?
employees like 10, and then there's like after contractors like 16, maybe something like that.
Okay.
And I think before the team was like 3 or 4,
Right.
because Reddit's growing quickly right now. So that's one piece. And before, the iOS app was mainly implemented as MVC architecture, model view controller.
Naturally,
Which-
as all of them start, right?
Yeah, and I think that's often a good place to start. Often, I wouldn't say always, but often, because it's simple, and if you just gotta execute and get things done, which is where Reddit was at that time, that's just simple. And then you can evolve the architecture later. My opinion, but that's kind of where they're at. So that's some context. So basically, the problem we were trying to solve is we were gonna start using Texture, which is a third-party SDK, and
As formerly known as ASDK.
Yeah, formerly known as Async Display Kit. It was developed at Facebook, and now Pinterest has kind of taken over and is like now shepherding it and continuing the development of it. And just a really quick TLDR of what Texture is. Essentially, on iOS, everything's for layout, and for layout is pretty much done on the main thread. And the reason was UIKit and kind of iOS in general was made when multi-core was not big, right? And so you only do things on one thread at that point, because you're not going to get much benefit if you make everything concurrent, right? With just the one core. But now every device is multi-core, and so you're kind of leaving some performance gains on the table if you don't take advantage of that. And so what was happening was, for layout in iOS in particular, and on dynamically sized views, or dynamically, so if you have let's say a feed like Facebook or Reddit, where you have a feed of content, you're going to hit a network and get all these different sized cells. If let's say it's a UI collection view, and you have the different cells in there, they're all going to be different size because all your content is different, right? And so as you're scrolling, they have to dynamically create these cells of different size with different, images or video, or different font. Sorry, not font, but different strings, right? So things will be dynamic. And so when you're scrolling on these feeds, what happens is doing all the work on the main thread is not going to keep up, because it's just too much.
And especially when you use auto layout, right?
So yeah, auto layout in particular is very bad, and we ran into this problem at Wanilo. Auto layout, I think, becomes like exponential time or something very expensive, because when your inheritance hierarchy gets deeper, those constraints, resolving the constraints, gets to be an expensive operation. Reddit didn't use auto layout for this exact reason. They use manual frames because they found that auto layout was actually not fast enough. But still, even with manual frame setting, it still was not buttery smooth 60 FPS, 60 frames per second that we wanted. And so what Texture does is it will pre-compute some of that work on a background thread before the cell comes on screen. And so once just as the cell is about to come on screen, instead of computing everything like, I need to do, what's particularly expensive are things like I think image like encoding or decoding,
Right.
and text sizing for text for layout is expensive as well. Things like that. Those are already cached because they have been pre-computed ahead of time before it came on screen. So it'll just in texture, it'll just ask. You have the concept of a node which wraps around a UI view. You'll just ask the node, "Oh, hey, what's the size for this frame here?" And it's already been pre-computed, and you just get it right away and you set it. So the TLDR of what Texture does is it's an asynchronous layout framework, meaning you asynchronously ahead of time on multiple. You take advantage of your multiple cores to get work done faster and do it ahead of time, cache it, so that as the views come on screen, the cells come on screen as you're scrolling, they immediately have those values and can just quickly set up the cell. That is the TLDR of why we use Texture and what Texture does.
So you take that beautiful framework, and then you want to use it in your Reddit app, right?
Yeah, so we wanted to use it in Reddit. The reason why Alex is calling it beautiful is because we actually
It is actually beautiful.
he likes it a lot. Well, I like it a lot too. But me and him used it together at Winila before, so we have some experience with it. But yeah, so we took it at Reddit, and what we found was on the view controller level. Remember, I said we had model view controller architecture. In order to implement Texture, we would have to have tons of code duplication, and I'm talking literally copy paste of our view controllers code. And so the other piece here is that we had a massive view controller problem, and still do in a sense, and we're working through that. And this is part of what the model view presenter architecture is doing to help fix. But we were finding that our view control. Let's say we had a feed view controller, and then we have a texture feed view controller. Those were let's say it's 1,000 lines in each one. Those 1,000 lines are almost exactly the same. There was a lot of code duplication. And so what's the promise of model view controller? The promise of model view controller is you have this separation of concern so that you don't end up in places like this where you have tons of code reuse. I'm sorry, tons of not code reuse, tons of code duplication, right? Where you're not. Mm-hmm. So the promise is not being fulfilled. We should have code reuse, and we weren't getting it. And so my question was, why is this happening? Now, this is my opinion, and this is a separate opinion. And actually, me and you were talking about I want to write an article and maybe have a discussion on the podcast. Likely will at some point. I think model view controller is inherently, at least model view controller in iOS. This right, is key. Yeah. This is very, very key point. In iOS is just inherently flawed. And so, right, because one is it's model view controller, not model view and controller. Right. We have view controllers in iOS, and you have this tight coupling between the view and the controller, which is kind of...
It shouldn't be.
Yeah,
it's not the original Smalltalk thing.
That's antithetical to the spirit of model view controller, or just good architecture in general. You don't have this separation. So I said, okay, well, what do you do, right? Well, the big thing I love is composition. You find out where can we push common code. We look in in these two view controllers that have kind of code duplication, and say where can we push out common logic into a common object, and then in that common object we just compose our view controllers with those common objects. And so our view controllers will get slimmed down, one, and two, they'll have that code reuse where they can call into. Now the view controllers are still going to have to be, you're still going to have your view controllers because we're in iOS land, and that's a view implementation detail that we need to exist on the iOS, in the iOS ecosystem. You don't have an app if you don't have views and view controllers, right? At least not a usable one. Yeah. So we looked at the options, and me and Alex, we're always having these discussions. So I kind of know the options out there, but for me, I figured we'd go with the model view presenter. And the reason why, personally, I thought that was the right move was because model view presenter is, you just basically introduce this new object called a presenter, and you can just push out any code duplication from the view controller into this presenter. Now, is this essentially what the presenter becomes is it becomes kind of a sink in a way, that you say is anything that's not view related, push into the view controller. I'm sorry, push from the view controller into the presenter. So, is this proper? Is this a proper presenter with like proper presenter single responsibility? No, to be quite honest, no, it's not. But neither was the view controller. The view controller was even worse because it had the view controller responsibilities and all these other responsibilities that the presenter is now taking on. So you didn't get perfect architecture, but you got one step better.
So yeah, so you basically kind of in your house, you just cleaned one room,
right?
And
so
moved all this stuff into another room.
Actually, yeah, that's a good way of saying it. Like, let's say you only clean your bathroom. Yes, the rest of your house is still dirty, but at least one room's cleaner, right? And you had to move some other stuff into the other rooms from your bathroom into your other rooms, but at least you're getting there. And the next week you can clean your bedroom, right? And then you just kind of go through it, and then you maintain, your bathroom and your bedroom. And I don't know if this is the best analogy, but so I think that to me it was like an iterative way of getting the architecture a little better. You just push stuff out of the view controllers into this presenter. Now, later, maybe 6 months from now, a year from now, whatever, I don't know, we can push stuff out even further from the presenter. Let's say we want to do Viper, or like Uber's rib stuff, or, there's other architectures where you kind of have more responsibilities and push things out. We can still do that. We just, same thing that I did with the view controller. We look at the presenter and we say, okay, what in here is shared? What in here can we push out to other objects and compose the presenter? Just the same thing that we did with the view controller. Just keep pushing stuff out. So that was in my mind. It was, we're going to slim down the massive view controller by implementing this presenter. We're going to get code reuse by getting this presenter. And it's not perfect, but in the future, we can just keep pushing stuff out from the presenter into the next. So it's like this iterative way of getting the architecture better. Now, what happened was, now the texture view controller, the texture feed view controller, and the regular feed view controller now have a ton of code reuse that they can call into this common presenter, which is awesome. So we were able to implement texture, and now the view controllers only differ in how the implementation details of how texture requires the differences to exist.
So can you maybe give specific examples of like what you kept in the view controllers and what moved?
Okay, yeah, I can give a perfect example. Reload data. In UIKit, you call reload data, and it reloads the table view, and or I guess in this case it was the collection view, and it reloads stuff and kind of just reloads it really quickly. In texture, this is expensive. The reason why it's expensive is because everything for the entire collection view, not just things on screen, are recomputed. So if someone scrolls and has 500, they've scrolled through 500 things of content. In this case, Reddit, it's posts, 500 posts. You have to reload data for 500 things, so it's expensive. So a reload data in regular UIKit line on a collection view is fast. People won't even notice it, but a reload data on texture will take. It could take, if you scroll quite a while, it can take like 2-3 seconds for the table or the collection view to reload.
That's quite a lot.
Now, so here, this is where the difference in the view controllers come in handy, right? So if we have just a regular feed view controller, call reload data, works out okay. Now on our texture feed view controller, we don't call reload data. What we do is we reload only the cells on screen. So here, now there's the difference in implementation between texture feed view controller and feed view controller.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm curious, so your presenter object, how did you implement that? Is that just a plain old NS object subclass, or?
Oh yeah, definitely. So here's the thing. The presenter is a plain old NS object. I guess in Swift it'd be a plain old object, meaning we control it. Like, we're not subclassing from some frameworks class. I think there's rumors of like view controllers being like 20,000, 30,000 lines of code, which wouldn't surprise me. because they do a lot. They have a lot of responsibilities. So once you're subclassing from that view controller, you're already taking on all that responsibility from the view controller. Right from the get-go, that thing isn't a single responsibility. Now, if you have an NS object or just a regular object, you're starting clean, creating a new one. You're not taking on any responsibilities.
Yep.
It's whatever you implement it as. And also the other thing is you control everything in that presenter, right? So if Apple goes and changes something in their view controller, you're dependent. You've created that dependency on them. But with the presenter or any object that you create that doesn't inherit from any framework given code like the view controller, you control it. Nothing's going to change unless you change it. Nothing's going to break unless you break it. That's the beauty of it.
Yeah, and also down the road, I guess, makes it testable. All of that,
yeah,
right?
yeah, all that other stuff. I know you like that testing, Alex.
Of
Got to
course.
throw that.
You guys gotta test. Come on.
So that's where we're at. That's what happened with the feed. So with every one of these things, I think you introduce another layer and another level of indirection. So there is a little bit more overhead, but I think the benefit is definitely there. Now, when the team was only 2 people and they were trying to crank out code and just get the thing done, I can understand why you just do view controller and you don't take the time to get a presenter. You're just trying to get things done. And also the benefit of me going in there and refactoring it is I know what the code base looks like already. When you're trying to anticipate your architecture, you don't know which direction the app's going to go. That's the business. The business can completely change, and so you don't have a clarity on what the architecture is. So I had the benefit of seeing where the app mostly already looks like, right? And seeing most of what the entity objects are and things like that, the main core business logic. So I have the benefit of looking at code and saying okay, I see that I need to push things out and how it can work versus someone who's just making the app for the first time. You don't know how the code base is going to evolve. So it's it's a little more difficult to architect things perfectly.
Right. Yeah. You don't want to do a premature optimization or premature
exactly.
architecture.
You don't want to invest all this time in architecture and optimization, and then you find out, product manager said we're not doing this thing anymore, this feature, and then we just spend all this time making this beautifully architected code, well unit tested and all that. So that's kind of the trade-off between perfect engineering practice and meeting business needs. Now, Reddit is, in my opinion, much more, the app in particular is much more mature, so I think we should start investing in things like architecture, separating things out into bigger objects that we compose ourselves out of, putting in unit tests, things like that, and that's precisely what we're moving towards. So now I think this is the way to go, and we should continue to clean things up and kind of put things where they're supposed to be.
What was challenging with that refactoring? Because I know you told me you were working on that for quite some time, right?
Yeah, I think the challenge of it was just the immensity of it. Because, I'm refactoring the feed code, which is, Reddit is nothing without the feed. Reddit is just all feeds, right? 90% of the app, 95% of the app is feeds. So the challenge of it was just the immensity of the project, right? I'm affecting essentially the entire application by doing this refactor, and I'm touching core code, which means other people are also in the so I'm essentially other people are building on top of this structure, and I'm changing out the underlying the underlying structure, or sorry, I'm losing
the core of it, right?
Yeah, I'm changing out the foundation. That's the word I was looking for. I'm changing out the foundation as people are building on top of that foundation. So that was the challenge, because without the foundation, you don't have anything steady to rest yourself on. So that was the challenge. I think with that was honestly, I think with me and how I dealt with that was just trying to work really fast. I don't know. That was just me. I was working a lot at this time. I was trying to work really fast and then just trying to continually merge in to merge and develop into our feature branch that we're working out of, so that we're always up to date with any changes that people made. But as soon as we were relatively stable, we merged our texture feature branch into the main develop branch, because it just, at a certain point, the code bases will start to diverge a lot, and then you're spending all your time fixing merge conflicts and things like that. So I think it was about a month before of our working on our own feature branch, which was quite a while, before we merged into develop and then formally announced to everyone, hey guys, we're using a presenter. This is what this is how it should be used, so on. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, big refactorings. I remember how we were doing it at Vanilla. I loved them.
It was a challenge, but I liked it. It was a great opportunity, and I really enjoyed it and had a lot of fun and got to apply a lot of the stuff we talk about on here. So I'm looking forward to doing even more improvements to the code base in the future, and getting things cleaned up and pushing things out to more sensible places, and trying to make the code base just a little bit more cleaner.
Nice. That's the goal, guys. Make it cleaner.
Cool.
All right. You can reach us on Twitter at Inside iOS Dev.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, would love to hear from you. And there is a book that one of us wrote. If you want to prep for interviews, iOS, go to iosinterviewguide.com. It's going to help you.
How much does that book cost? Like $500? I mean, that's how much I would pay if it's going to get me a great job.
Right? Think about how much money you'll earn
is it 500,
in a year.
600? What are you charging?
No, guys, it's a steal. It's $39.
$39.
Yeah.
Wow. The book that helped me get my job at Reddit, is that inexpensive?
Yeah, imagine that.
Wow. Man.
All right, guys. Yeah. Till next time.
All right. Take care.